Publius Aelius Hadrianus, born in 76 AD, serving as the Roman emperor from 117 to 138, of course better known by the shortened form Hadrian. His reign marked a significant shift from territorial expansion to consolidation, symbolized by the construction of the famous Hadrian's Wall in Britain, which defined the empire's northern boundary. A passionate traveler, Hadrian devoted over half of his reign to exploring the provinces, strengthening borders, and integrating diverse peoples into the imperial structure. Emphasizing cultural unity and architectural innovation, he commissioned the iconic structures such as the Pantheon and Hadrian's Villa at Tivoli. Philosophically inclined and deeply interested in the arts, he promoted Hellenistic traditions throughout the empire. His governance introduced more compassionate laws concerning slavery and the rights of minors. To ensure a smooth succession, he adopted Antoninus Pius, stipulating that he, in turn, adopt Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus, no doubt two names you're very familiar with. Hadrian's reign is thus often regarded as a pinnacle of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, significantly enhancing the cultural and also architectural legacy of the Roman Empire. And that's what we're here to talk about today. From start to finish, the fascinating life of Hadrian. Not too often talked about. Everyone wants to talk about Caesar and Aurelius and all that. Look, I get it. But Hadrian's fun to talk about too. So let's do that. As always, special thank you to all the members and Patreons helping to keep the channel going. Really do appreciate you. And just thank you in general to everybody who's drops a like and subscribe on the video. That helps with the algorithm. You know what it's like. Now, without further ado, let's get on with it. The life of Hadrian, as we begin in January of 76 AD, in a little Roman settlement near present-day Seville, where Publius Aelius Hadrianus was born, hailing from a lineage rooted in the gens Aelia. Now, the little settlement he lived in was called Italica, not Italia, Italica. It was established during the Second Punic War by Italic colonists under the great Scipio Africanus in the province of Hispania Baetica. The family name, Hadrianus, traces back to Hadria in Italy's Picenum region, which is modern-day Atri. While most sources do agree on his birthplace, there is a minority of scholars, one of which includes a Roman biographer, that suggests that Hadrian was actually born in Rome. But it seems the weight of discourse is still well and truly back in that little town of Italica. Now, on to Hadrian's family. His father, Publius Aelius Hadrianus Afer, was a senator of Praetorian rank, who was born and educated in Italica too, and his mother, Domitia Paulina, came from a distinguished Roman senatorial family in Gades, which is modern-day Cadiz. He had one older sister too, and she was named Aelia Domitia Paulina. Now, there was a significant figure in his early life, that being Germana, who was his wet nurse, who was a slave, possibly of Germanic origin, and he actually remained quite close to her throughout his entire life. Later, he actually freed her, giving her her emancipation, quite nice of him, and she actually outlived him, as indicated by her funerary inscription found at Hadrian's villa in Tivoli. Hadrian's great-nephew, Gnaeus Pedanius Fuscus Salinator, from Barcino, which is nowadays Barcelona, hopefully you can point that out on a map, would later serve as his co-consul in 118 AD. Now his father, he spent much of his time in Rome, always away on work, on his senatorial duties. It's just the way it is. One of Hadrian's most notable family connections was actually to Trajan. That's right, the Emperor Trajan, his father's first cousin. And he was also a Seneca from Italica too. Well, despite being labeled as advenae, which is outsiders, by Aurelius Victor, both Trajan and Hadrian were of Italic descent and belonged to Rome's elite, no matter what anyone said. Now, some scholars have proposed to referring to them as part of the Ulpio-Aelian dynasty, but we're not going to get too deep into that. It's not really relevant in the grand scheme of things, to be honest. Now, what is relevant is the tragic loss that Hadrian experienced at the age of 10 in 86 AD, where both of his parents died. He and his sister became wards of Trajan and Publius Aelius Hadrianus, who would later become Trajan's praetorian prefect. Now, an active youth with a passion for hunting, Hadrian was called to Rome at the age of 14 by Trajan himself to receive an education that was pretty typical and more suitable for a young Roman noble. The kind of thing that you couldn't really get out into the provinces, at least not in those provinces. Maybe ones closer to home, Greek provinces, parts of southern Gaul, things like this. Well, of course, his deepest interest was in Greek literature and also Greek culture, and it actually earned him the name Graeculus, which means little Greek. Now, this doesn't sound too bad, but you see, there was always this distinction drawn between being a Roman and not being a Roman. Now, if you were going to be anything besides a Roman, you better be Greek. But still, this term little Greek was a mild form of derision. Now, Hadrian's early career in Rome began as a member of the Decemviri Stiltibulus Judiciantis, and of one minor magistracies that were often the first steps in the cursus honorum, the sequence of public offices that led to higher positions and a senatorial career. He then served as a military tribune with 3 different legions, getting in that fighting experience. Now, during his second tribunate, the aging Emperor Nerva adopted Trajan as his successor. Hadrian was dispatched to inform Trajan of this significant promotion, likely among several messengers assigned to the task. Serving 3 tribunates provided Hadrian with considerable professional advantages, as most heirs from established senatorial families typically served only 1 or 2 before advancing to higher offices. Now, Nerva, he wasn't around for too much longer after this. Of course, the writing was already on the wall for him. He died in 98 AD, and upon his death, Hadrian himself reportedly hurried to deliver the news to Trajan ahead of the official messenger sent by the governor, who actually happened to be Hadrian's brother-in-law and rival, Lucius Julius Ursus Servianus. Well, upon returning to Rome 3 years later, in AD 101, Hadrian was elected quaestor and became quaestor imperatoris Traiani, acting as a liaison between Trajan and the Senate. A pretty good position, that's for sure, but a lot of responsibility. Now, in this role, he transmitted the emperor's communications and speeches, possibly even composing them on behalf of Trajan, a position previously held by the influential Licinius Sura. Following this, Hadrian served as ab actis senatus, responsible for keeping the Senate's records. Now, it wasn't all peace and record keeping. There's war, too. Seems to be a trend for Rome. And at this time, it was the First Dacian War. Dacia was a frontier province out there to the east. Now, this was around 105 AD, and Hadrian was part of Trajan's personal entourage. But he was later relieved of his military duties to become a tribune of the plebs in Rome. After the war, he had likely achieved the rank of praetor. Now, the war in Dacia was far from over, of course. There was a second Dacian war, and in this war, he joined up again to Trajan's inner circle as the legate of Legio I Minervia. By 107 AD, Hadrian was appointed governor of Lower Pannonia with the task of containing the Sarmatians. Containing them in whatever way you can, I suppose. Well, between 107 and 108, he successfully repelled an invasion by the Lazyges into Roman territories of Banat and Oltenia. While the exact terms of the subsequent peace agreement are unknown to us, it is believed that Rome retained control of Oltenia in exchange for certain concessions, most likely a one-time tribute. As we always say on this channel, nothing greases the wheels more than that. The Lazyges gained control of Banat during this period, likely as part of the treaty. And so, at this time, Hadrian was in his mid-30s, the prime of life. Hadrian traveled to Greece, where he was granted Athenian citizenship, of course, Little Greek, and served briefly as the Epomenos Archon of Athens in 112 AD. Now, the Athenians were very keen on giving him a warm welcome, and they even honored him with a statue inscribed in the Theatre of Dionysus, detailing his career achievements up to that point, which is very handy when you're trying to date when the statue was made. But he's not mentioned again until Trajan's Parthian campaign, suggesting he may have remained in Greece until rejoining Trajan as a legate. When disturbances resurfaced in Dacia, the governor of Syria was sent to address them, and Hadrian was appointed as his successor, with independent authority. Now, as Trajan fell seriously ill and set sail back for Rome, Hadrian stayed behind in Syria, effectively having full command of the Eastern Roman army. Trajan reached Selinus in Cilicia, but he died there, August 8th, 117 AD. He is remembered as one of Rome's most esteemed emperors. Yes, I'll do a video on Trajan soon. Probably should have done one before I did the Hadrian video. Well, it is what it is, isn't it? Now, around 100 or 100 AD, during his quaestorship, Hadrian got married. Congratulations! And the lucky lady was Vibia Sabina, Trajan's grandniece, who was about 17 or 18 years old. Now, Trajan seemed pretty indifferent to the marriage, we are told, and ultimately it proved unhappy, Certainly hard to recover from being indifferent from the wedding onwards. Doesn't set a good precedent. Well, the marriage may have been orchestrated by Trajan's wife, Plotina, a learned and influential woman who shared Hadrian's vision of the Roman Empire as a commonwealth rooted in Hellenic culture. By supporting Hadrian's potential succession, Plotina and her family stood to maintain their status after Trajan's death. Well, Hadrian also benefited from the support of his mother-in-law, Salonia Matidia. Remember that his parents had actually died quite young. Now, this was the daughter of Trajan's beloved sister, Ulpia Marciana. When Marciana died in 112, Trajan deified her and elevated Matidia to the rank of Augusta. Now on to the specifics of Hadrian's relationship with Trajan. Well, it's a little complex. Well, complex at the best of times. Possibly strained at the worst. You see, he seemed to attempt to influence Trajan by building relationships with the emperor's young favorites, leading to unexplained tensions around the time of his marriage to Sabina. Despite his ambitions, Hadrian did not secure a senior consulship during Trajan's later years, serving only as a suffect consul in 108. This position placed him on equal footing with other senators, but lacked the prestige of a designated heir. Trajan could have elevated Hadrian to patrician status, which granted him privileges like early access to the consulship, without any prior tribunate service. But he chose not to do this. Now, although Hadrian became tribune of the plebs at a younger age than usual, he had to leave Dacia and Trajan to assume the role, and it's possible that Trajan wanted him to leave. Now, we got mention in the Historia Augusta, the mentions that Trajan gave Hadrian a diamond ring, which was originally from Nerva, which, I quote, encouraged Hadrian's hopes for the throne. Well, either way, it seems that while Trajan did advance his career, the career of Hadrian that is, he did so rather cautiously. Well, failing to name an heir, of course, could lead to destructive power struggles, and even civil war. And it often did. But announcing one too early is a problem too. You see, you announce one too early and people think that you are abdicating, which also complicates a smooth transition. And so, in the final days as Trajan lay dying, attended by his wife Plotina and closely watched over by prefect Attianus, he could have legally adopted Hadrian through a simple declaration before witnesses. He could have. But the adoption document that surfaced bore Plotina's signature, not Trajan's, which is of course a problem. But additionally, Hadrian's absence from the adoption ceremony in Syria was seen as quite irregular, as Roman law required both parties to be present. Well, his succession was clouded by rumors and doubts, and some speculate that Trajan's young servant, Phaedemos, who died shortly after Trajan, was either killed or took his own life to avoid scrutiny. Ancient sources are divided on the legitimacy of Hadrian's adoption. You ask Cassius Dio, he'll tell you it's false, while the author of the Historia Augusta accepted it as completely genuine. No problem at all. Either way, there was a gold coin minted in Hadrian's reign that reflects the official stance, and nothing proves an emperor like coinage. It depicts him as Trajan's Caesar, his designated heir. Hard to argue with that. A reign cast in gold. Now, according to the Historia Augusta, Hadrian informed the Senate of his rise to power via a letter presenting his succession as an accomplished and unarguable fact. He then explained that the soldiers' swift action in proclaiming him emperor was driven by their belief that the state could not function without one, and that's a pretty solid belief, to be honest. It cannot function without one. Well, to reward the legions for their loyalty, Hadrian granted them a customary bonus, and the Senate confirmed his acclamation. The empire celebrated with numerous public festivities, honoring Hadrian's divine selection by all the gods, including the deified Trajan. Well, Hadrian remained in the eastern provinces for a time. He wasn't too keen on settling down. Why would he? He had that Jewish rebellion to address that had begun between Trajan's reign, and that was a big problem. New provinces, it's hard to get them to behave. Well, the Moorish general Lucius Quietus was dismissed. He was the governor of Judea, and that removed him from command of his Moorish troops. Afterwards, Hadrian moved to suppress the unrest across the Danube frontier himself, taking matters into his own hands, sleeves well and truly rolled up, ready for the fight. Now back in Rome, his former guardian and current Praetorian prefect Attianus claimed to have uncovered a conspiracy involving Lucius Quietus and 3 prominent senators, that being Lucius Publius Celsus, Aulus Cornelius Palma, Frontonianus, and Gaius Avidius Nigrinus. Very complex names, Now, without public trials, these 4 were tried in absentia, pursued, and when found, well, you know what happened when they found them. Well, Hadrian asserted that Attianus had acted completely independently, later elevating him to senatorial and consular rank before retiring him by 120. He assured the Senate that their traditional right to judge their own members would be respected moving forward. Now, the exact reasons behind the executions, rather than some other, think about banishment, exile, these sorts of things, some other punishment for them, well, it remains a little bit uncertain. But you see, official recognition of Hadrian as Trajan's rightful successor may have come too late to prevent other potential claimants. His main rivals were Trajan's closest allies, you see, and senior members of the Imperial Council, individuals who could have been legitimate contenders for the throne, and you know what happens to other contenders for the throne. Also, supporters of Trajan's expansionist policies, while Hadrian had intended to reverse them. Aulus Cornelius Palma, known for conquering Arabia Nabatea, likely had vested interests in the east of his own. The Historia Augusta depicts Palma and Lucius Publius Celsus, who, by the way, had served as consul for not the first but the second time in 113, as personal enemies, who openly opposed Hadrian. The 4th individual, Gaius Avidius Nigrinus, was a former consul, intellectual, and reportedly a friend, quite close one, of Pliny the Younger, and briefly the governor of Dacia, at least at the start of Hadrian's reign. He was possibly Hadrian's chief rival, a senator of high rank and even higher connections. According to the Historia Augusta, Hadrian had even considered naming Nigrinus as his successor before deciding to eliminate him. Well, shortly after these events, in 125, Hadrian appointed one Quintus Marcius Turbo as his new Praetorian prefect. Turbo was a close friend, a leading member of the equestrian order, a high-ranking judicial official and procurator. Hadrian implemented a policy preventing equestrians from judging cases against senators, thereby preserving the Senate's exclusive legal authority over all of its members. The Senate remained thus the highest court of appeal, and formal appeals to the emperor against its decisions were completely forbidden. No exceptions. Better luck next time, kid. Whether or not Hadrian fully grasped the impact, this move failed to repair the damage that was caused earlier by Hadrianus, and his reputation and relationship with the Senate remained strained for the rest of his reign. Well, we have some sources that suggest that Hadrian occasionally employed a network of informers, such as the frumentari, to discreetly investigate high-ranking individuals, including senators and close associates. We're talking private investigators, detectives for hire, that sort of thing. Well, Hadrian would spend more than half of his reign traveling outside of Italy, unlike previous emperors who simply relied on reports from their envoys while they stayed in Rome. He chose to observe conditions across the empire first-hand, getting well and truly involved with all of the provinces. Earlier rulers often left Rome for extended periods, mainly to conduct wars, returning only after the conflicts were resolved, having a nice triumph, a big party, all little rose petals thrown down on them. It's pretty nice. Well, Hadrian's frequent journeys might represent a deliberate break from traditions that viewed the empire solely as Roman dominion. It wasn't about, well, this part in the province or this part in the province. No, it's just a little piece of Rome that is having some trouble. A little dirty spot we need to go and clean up. Well, of course, Hadrian aimed to integrate provincial populations into a kind of commonwealth of civilized societies, unified by a Hellenic culture under Roman governance. So instead of establishing new Roman colonies with Roman laws, he promoted the development of provincial cities. In Latin we say municipia. That's where we get the word municipal from. Municipal government, municipal laws, this sort of thing. And these would have been self-governing urban centers with their own customs and their own legal systems. But still, standing beneath that umbrella of Roman guidance and Greek culture. Now, of course, we've mentioned the coins. The coins are great. We call this study numismatics, numis being the word for coin or money, I believe. The coins minted during the later part of Hadrian's reign reflect his global and, frankly, an inclusive vision. It depicts him of somewhat raising up personifications of various provinces. Later, Aelius Aristides noted that Hadrian extended a protective hand over his subjects, assisting them as one helps those who have stumbled. Sounds like a nice guy, doesn't he? Well, this approach is unfortunately not well received by Roman traditionalists. The indulgent Emperor Nero had previously undertaken a long and peaceful tour of Greece, attracting criticism from the Roman elite for neglecting his essential duties. Nero had enjoyed widespread support in the eastern provinces, and to a lesser extent in the west. Rumors of his return or resurrection emerged soon after his death, and Hadrian may have consciously tapped into these favorable associations during his travels. Well, in the Historia Augusta, he is described as excessively Greek, seen as way too cosmopolitan for a Roman emperor by traditional standards, too Greek for Roman town, too Roman for Greek town. What are we going to do with Hadrian? Well, before Hadrian arrived in Britannia, which is of course that wall of his being his most famous achievement, the province experienced a major uprising since between the years of 119 and 121. There are inscriptions that reference an Expeditio Britannica, British expedition, that involves several troop movements, including a detachment of about 3,000 soldiers. Fronto mentions military defeats in Britannia during this time. Things were not going to plan. Coin inscriptions from 119 to 120 confirm that Quintus Pompeius Falco was sent to restore order. In 122 AD, Hadrian initiated the construction of the wall, which was intended to separate the Romans from the barbarians. While it's plausible that the wall was built in response to a genuine threat, or at least its resurgence, this remains a little speculative. A prevailing desire to halt the empire's expansion may have been the decisive factor, but also reducing defense costs might have played their own role, as the wall effectively prevented incursions into Roman territory more cheaply than maintaining a large border force. Well, it also regulated this cross-border trade and immigration. Either way, a shrine was established at York to honor Britannia as the personification of Britain, and coins were minted bearing her image, recognized as Britannia. By the end of 122 AD, Hadrian had completed his journey to Britannia, but he never saw the finished wall which now bears his name. Well, it appears that Hadrian had also travelled through southern Gaul. Now, at Nemausus, modern-day Nimes, he likely oversaw the construction of a basilica dedicated to the patroness Plotina, who had recently died in Rome and had been deified at the request of Hadrian himself. Around this time, Hadrian dismissed his secretary, the biographer Suetonius, for his excessive familiarity with the empress, and we all know what that means. Now Gaius Septicius Clarus, who served alongside Marcius Turbo as a praetorian prefect, was also removed for the same alleged reason, which may have been a pretext for their dismissal. Hadrian spent the winter of 122 to 23 AD in Tarraco, Spain, and while he was there, he spent his time rebuilding the Temple of Augustus. Now, winter over. In 123 AD, Hadrian crossed the Mediterranean to Mauritania, personally leading a brief campaign against local insurgents. Unfortunately, his visit was cut short due to reports of military mobilization by Parthia, prompting him to head east. At some point, he visited Cyrene, where he personally financed the military training of young men from wealthy families for service in the Roman army. Cyrene had already benefited during Hadrian's reign from his reconstruction of public buildings damaged during the earlier Trajanic Jewish uprising. Well, it is possible that during his time in Claudiopolis, Hadrian met Antinous, a young man of humble origins, who would later become his beloved companion. Now, sources offer little detail about when or where they met. Representations of Antinous show him around 20 years old, just before his death in 130. So, in 123, he may have been about 13 or 14. Antinous may have been sent to Rome for education as a page to the emperor, eventually becoming his favorite. The favorite what? The specifics of their relationship remain largely unknown, and I'm not going to dig too far into that one. Now, regardless of Antinos's presence, Hadrian continued his travels through Anatolia. Various accounts place him at different locations and mention his founding of the city Hadrianathure in Mysia after a successful boar hunt. Around this time, plans were made to complete the temple of Zeus at Cyzicus, which had been started by the rulers of Pergamon. The temple was adorned with a colossal statue of Hadrian, just for good measure, and thus Cyzicus, Pergamon, Smyrna, Ephesus, and Sardes were all designated as regional centers for the imperial cult. In the following year, the autumn of 124 AD, Hadrian arrived in Greece and participated in the Eleusinian Mysteries. He had a special affinity for Athens, which had previously granted him citizenship and an archonship at the Athenians' request. He revised their constitution, including a creation of a new tribe, of course, named after him. Hadrian combined proactive initiatives with cautious restraint. He declined to intervene in local disputes between olive oil producers and the Athenian Assembly and Council, who had set production quotas that the producers found unreasonable, but he did approve an imperial subsidy for the Athenian grain supply. He established 2 endowments to fund public games, festivals, and competitions in the absence of citizens willing or able to sponsor them. Now, Hadrian often encouraged Greek elites, including priests or the imperial cult, to focus on more practical and lasting contributions, particularly public works like aqueducts and fountains. Athens also received 2 such fountains because of this. One brought water from Mount Parnes to the Athenian Agora through a complex system of aqueducts and reservoirs, a project that would take several years to complete. Other foundations were provided to Argos to alleviate a severe and long-standing water shortage, so severe that in the Homeric epics we have mention of thirsty Argos. Just shows you how the problem was. Well, during the winter, Hadrian toured the Peloponnese, which makes me very jealous. The exact route is uncertain, but likely included Epidaurus. According to Pausanias, temples were built there by Hadrian, and the locals erected a statue of him, a rather heroic one, completely nude, as a gesture of gratitude to their restorer. Now, if that's not Greek style, I don't know what is. I'm sure Hadrian would have been delighted, provided they didn't rip him off on the proportions. Now, it is possible that Hadrian and Antinos were lovers by this time. Hadrian showed particular favor to Mantinea, which had ancient, mythological, and politically advantageous connections to Antinos's homeland back in Bithynia. He also restored the temple of Poseidon in Hippios in Mantinea, and, as Pausanias notes, reinstated the city's original classic name. You see, it didn't used to be called Mantinea. It had been called, during the Hellenistic time, Antigonea, in honor of King Antigonus II, Doson III. Hadrian also rebuilt ancient sanctuaries at Abae and Megara, as well as the Heraion of Argos. Now, while traveling through the Peloponnese, he persuaded the Spartan noble Eurycles Herculanus, head of the Euclid dynasty that had ruled Sparta since Augustus's time, to finally join up with the Roman Senate, along with the Athenian noble Herodes Atticus the Elder. Now these two became the first representatives from what was known as Old Greece to enter the Roman Senate. Pretty historic time. The historic rivalry and prominence of Sparta and Athens that no doubt you know from the old wars. And this was a significant step in encouraging Greek elites to participate in a more Roman-style political life. In March of 125 AD, Hadrian presided over the Athenian festival of Dionysia, wearing Athenian attire. Always the little Greek. And in true Greek fashion, he couldn't ignore the terrible state of the temple of Olympian Zeus, which had been under construction for nearly 500 years. It makes my government look pretty good by comparison, building the highways, I suppose. Well, Hadrian gave substantial funding to that and ensured its completion. And it was completed. Of course, the Greeks were very happy about this. Now, after his return to Italy, he took a brief little detour to Sicily, where coins were minted celebrating him as the island's restorer, kind of like a national hero. Back in Rome, he witnessed the reconstructed Pantheon and his completed villa near Tibur in the Sabine Hills. In early March of 127, he embarked on a tour of Italy, with his route pieced together by historians based on his various gifts and offerings that he gave along the way. And during this journey, he restored the shrine of Cupra in Cupra Maritima and improved the drainage of Lake Fucinus. However, his decision that same year to divide Italy into 4 provinces, governed by imperial legates of consular rank, was not well received, to say the least. These officials were given authority over all of Italy, except for Rome, effectively shifting Italian legal cases away from Roman courts. While the Roman Senate disapproved of reducing Italy to provincial status, and this reform did not survive far beyond Hadrian's reign. In fact, they rather quickly cleaned this up once he was dead and gone. Well, around this time, Hadrian actually began to feel ill, but his condition didn't prevent him from setting out to Africa in the spring of 128. His arrival coincided with timely rainfall that ended a drought. Of course, superstitions of the old world, this was seen as rather auspicious. In addition to acting as a benefactor and restorer, he took the opportunity to inspect the troops, and his speech to them has been preserved. Now, I might do a reading of that later on, but we'll see. Returning to Italy in the summer of 128, his stay was brief before he embarked on another journey lasting 3 years. In September of the same year, 128, Hadrian once again participated in the Eleusinian Mysteries. Now, this visit to Greece focused on Athens and Sparta, the ancient rivals for regional dominance, initially considering the League in Delphi as the center for his Greek revival. He ultimately pursued a more ambitious plan, establishing the Panhellenion, a council intended to unite Greek cities Well, after beginning the necessary preparations, which involved verifying claims to Greek city status, a process that required time, of course, Hadrian then departed for Ephesus. Traveling from Greece, through Asia, to Egypt, he likely crossed the Aegean Sea with an Ephesian merchant named Lucius Erastus and his entourage. He later wrote to the Council of Ephesus, recommending Erastus as a suitable candidate for town councillor and offering to pay the required fee. So obviously, he had made quite an impression. Now, just before the Egyptian New Year, Hadrian arrived in Egypt, August 29th, the year 130. He started his visit by restoring the tomb of Pompey the Great at Pelusium, performing a sacrifice in his honor and inscribing an epitaph on the monument. Now, since Pompey was known for solidifying Rome's control in the East, this act likely symbolized the reaffirmation of Roman authority following the social unrest during Trajan's later years. Hadrian and his companion Antinos went on a lion hunt in the Libyan desert. A poem by the Greek poet Pancrates about this event is the earliest evidence we have of their travels together. Nothing like a hunting trip, I suppose. Well, during their voyage to the Nile, something went wrong. Antinos drowned under what seems to be mysterious circumstances. The exact details of his death remain uncertain, of course. It's hard to sort of trace it back that far. But there are theories ranging from accident to murder to religious sacrifice and even the taking of his own life. We do have something from the Historia Augusta, though, which reads as following. During a journey on the Nile, he lost Antinos, his favorite, and for this youth he wept like a woman. Concerning this incident, there are varying rumors, for some claim that he had devoted himself to death for Hadrian, and others, what both his beauty and Hadrian's sensuality suggest. But however this may be, the Greeks deified him at Hadrian's request and declared that oracles were given through his agency. But these, it is commonly asserted, were composed by Hadrian himself. In honor of Antinos, Hadrian founded the city of Antinopolis on October 30th, 130. He then continued along the Nile to Thebes, where his visit to the Colossi of Memnon on November 20th and 24th was commemorated by 4 epigrams inscribed by Julia Balbilla. Proceeding northward, he arrived in the Fayum region in the beginning of December. Now, we don't really know too much about specifically what he was doing after his Nile journey, whether or not he returned to Rome immediately. Between 130 and 131, he traveled eastward to establish and inaugurate his new Panhellenon, centered around the Athenian temple of Olympian Zeus, which, if you do remember, he was the one who paid the money to renovate that. Well, due to local disputes that had undermined a previous initiative for Hellenic association based in Delphi, Hadrian had to choose a more inclusive league encompassing all Greek cities. Successful applicants for membership often involved mythologized or fabricated claims of Greek ancestry, and also declarations of loyalty to Imperial Rome, aligning with Hadrian's idealized and somewhat fantasized version of Hellenism. He viewed himself as a protector of Greek culture and the liberties of Greece, particularly regarding urban self-governance. This allowed him to position himself as the successor of Pericles, who was said to have organized an earlier Panhellenic Congress, a congress mentioned only in Plutarch's biography of Pericles, who held Rome's imperial authority in high esteem. Now, Hadrian spent the winter of 131 to 32 in Athens, where he dedicated the completed temple of Olympian Zeus, and in 132 he travelled eastward to Judea. Now, during Roman Judea, Hadrian visited Jerusalem, which remained in ruins following the First Roman-Jewish War of 66 to 73. He might have intended to reconstruct Jerusalem as a Roman colony, like to Vespasian's establishment of Caesarea Maritima, accompanied by various honorific and monetary privileges. The non-Roman populace had no need to engage in Roman religious ceremonies, but was anticipated to uphold Roman imperial structure. This is evidenced in Caesarea, where certain Jews fought in the Roman military during the rebellions of 66 and 132. It is conjectured that Hadrian aimed to integrate the Jewish temple into the conventional Roman civic religious imperial cult. Such integrations had historically been prevalent in Greece and other provinces, and generally had been proven effective, at least as effective as it can be, at least effective for the Romans, while the adjacent Samaritans had already amalgamated their religious practices with Hellenistic traditions. Did I say Samaritans? Samaritans. See, this is what happens when you read out loud for an hour straight. Excuse me. Well, strict Jewish monotheism demonstrated greater resilience against imperial persuasion and subsequent imperial demands. Now, a legend derived from the Historia Augusta suggests that the insurrection was incited by Hadrian's prohibition on circumcision, which he, as a Hellenist, regarded as a form of mutilation. But that wasn't all. There was also additional factors that could have exacerbated the outbreak. That being a somewhat oppressive and culturally insensitive Roman administration, conflicts between the landless and impoverished, and newly settled Roman colonists granted land. So you're telling me that the Romans have gone to Judea and have established settlements, and the local population are angry at them? History does repeat itself, doesn't it? Well, there was also a significant undercurrent of messianism, based on Jeremiah's prophecy that the temple would be reconstructed 70 years following its destruction, akin to the first temple after the Babylonian exile. Now, a significant Jewish insurrection against Hellenistic and Roman influence erupted, spearheaded by Simon Bar Kokhba. I've made a full video on the Jewish-Roman wars if you want a full explanation of that, but we'll just cover it quickly here. Well, due to the incomplete nature of the available information, it's pretty impossible for us to determine a precise date for the commencement of the revolt, likely commenced between the summer and autumn of 132. The Roman governor, Tineius Rufus, requested an army to suppress the insurrection, and Bar Kokhba himself penalized any Jew who declined to enlist in his forces. It was compulsory, even though it was a battle they were never going to win. Well, Justin Martyr and Eusebius indicate that this mostly involved Christian converts who contested Bar Kokhba's messianic assertions. The Romans were inundated by the systematic intensity of the insurrection. Hadrian summoned his general Sextus Julius Severus from Britain and mobilized troops from as distant as the Danube. The Roman casualties were substantial, amounting to an entire legion, or approximately 4,000 soldiers. But don't worry, it's just the early game. Hadrian's report on the war to the Roman Senate excluded the traditional salutation, "If you and your children are in health, it is well. I and the legions are in health." Him and the legions were not in health. Either way, the insurrection was suppressed in 135. Cassius Dio reports that Beitar, a fortified city located about 6 miles southwest of Jerusalem, succumbed after a siege lasting 3.5 years, starving them out. A little bit of disease in the mix, too. Of course, the Roman military campaigns in Judea resulted in around 580,000 Jewish fatalities and the destruction of 50 walled towns, along with 985 villages. A certain unspecified percentage of the population was also slaves. The magnitude of punitive actions against the Jewish population continues to be a kind of subject of contention. We're not really sure exactly how many passed away. I suppose we'll never really know. Well, Hadrian altered the province's designation to Syria Palestina. He dubbed Jerusalem Aelia Capitolina, in honor of himself and Jupiter Capitolinus, subsequently restructuring it in the Greek architectural style. Well, following the quelling of the insurrection, Hadrian granted the Samaritans a temple dedicated to Zeus Hypsistos, the highest Zeus, on Mount Gerizim. The violent suppression of the uprising concluded Jewish political autonomy from the Roman imperial system. Now, Hadrian resided in Rome during the concluding years of his life. In 134, he received an imperial salute marking the conclusion of the Third Jewish War, which did not officially cease until the subsequent year. Commemorations and achievements and awards were also minimalized, as Hadrian perceived the war as, I quote, "a harsh and abrupt disillusionment to his ambitions for a cosmopolitan empire." You see, his dream was for everybody to get along. Well, that was just not going to happen, I'm afraid. Well, Empress Sabina likely passed away around 136 too, following an unsatisfactory marriage with Hadrian that endured as political obligation. The Historia Augusta biography asserts that Hadrian himself proclaimed that his wife's ill temper and irritability would have sufficed as grounds for divorce if he were a private citizen. But once again, political obligation dictates that you have to remain married, like it or not. Would you believe that? Somebody stays in a marriage but is unhappy? Who would have thought? Well, Hadrian's union with Sabina was so unhappy that it was completely devoid of children. And now, in 136, afflicted by deteriorating health, he was faced with the matter of succession. In 136, he adopted Lucius Caeonius Commodus, one of the ordinary consuls of that year, who, as an emperor in waiting, assumed the name Lucius Aelius Caesar. Now, he was the son-in-law of Gaius Avidius Nigrinus, one of the 4 consulars executed in 118. His health was fragile, and his reputation seemed more akin to that of a decadent, well-educated nobleman than that of a leader. Numerous contemporary efforts have been undertaken to elucidate Hadrian's decision. It's been suggested that Aelius was actually Hadrian's biological son, but, well, we don't really have much proof of that. His adoption has been conjectured as Hadrian's sort of late effort to reconcile with the prominent senatorial family, whose key members were executed shortly after his accession. Aelius performed commendably as the joint ruler of Pannonia Superior and Inferior. He held an additional consulship in 137, but passed away in the 1st of January 138. Subsequently, Hadrian adopted Titus Aurelius Fulvus Boionis Arius Antoninus, the future Emperor Antoninus Pius, who I've done a full video on. Now, Hadrian's later years were characterized by strife and discontent. His endorsement of Aelius Caesar had met with disfavor, particularly from his brother-in-law, Lucius Julius Ursus Servianus, and Servianus's grandson Gnaeus Pedanius Fuscus Salinator. Servianus, despite his advanced age, was initially in the line of succession at the onset of Hadrian's reign. Fuscus is reputed to have had ambitions for imperial authority. In 137, he possibly orchestrated a coup including his grandfather, and Hadrian commanded their execution. Obviously, the coup failed. Servianus allegedly prayed prior his execution that Hadrian would yearn for death, but be incapable of dying. Throughout his terminal, extended sickness, Hadrian was thwarted from taking his own life on multiple instances. But nature always takes its course, and he passed away July 10th, 138, nice and comfortable in his villa at Baiae at the age of 62, after a 21-year reign. Well, I suppose it wasn't too comfortable. Cassius Dio and the Historia Augustus document aspects of his deteriorating health, indicators of coronary artery disease. Not a good way to go, but I can certainly think of worse ones. Rest in peace to our boy Hadrian. Well, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that one. A little longer than usual. How long was it? Yeah, it was a little over an hour. Well, I'd like to thank all the top-tier supporters. They are top people. That's Dark, Kerry, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Aaron, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stock Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, Jessica, Christine, Sally, Katiana, Christine, Fizabo, Legitmus, Maverick, Susan, and Dr. Neuronerd. That's an interesting one, isn't it? I wonder if he's a real doctor. Maybe he could have helped out Hadrian. Where's Dr. Neuronerd when you need him? Well, I suppose. A name like that, he's probably a brain surgeon. Well, thank you very much for listening, and as always, make sure you have a good rest, look after each other, and I hope that all the Americans listening are recovering from that terrible hurricane. It's been a few weeks now. I know it takes longer than that to recover. I'm sure your government is doing a very good job of making sure the cleanup effort is good. At least they should be. Good night, and I'll see you next time.